they found a second cave. And inside of the cave, they found the floor covered with something called fuller's earth. Now, I had to look this up. And it's a type of clay made from the weathering of volcanic ash, which was used back in the day to absorb oil from cloth. So you mix this clay with water and makes kind of a mud, and you wash the clothes with that. And what happens is this particular clay absorbs a lot of oil. So it was used in the process of making wool, where it soaks up the lanolin from the sheep, or it was used to clean clothes, where it soaks up the oil from whatever. So that's what fuller's earth was used for. And as I said, it's from the weathering of volcanic ash. Now, a lot of the islands that you find, islands in the middle of the ocean, are of two types. One, there's the coral reefs, which, they talked about the coral before, where those tend to be low, flat islands, like Tuvalu is one of those, where it's just like this big coral reef. And there's a little bit that's raised up, but for the most part, it's just almost flat with the ocean. It's only a few feet above the level of the ocean. The other type is a volcanic island, much like Hawaii. And so Hawaii was a volcanic island. Volcanoes exploded, lava came up, hit the water, hardened. So this is probably a volcanic island because of how, because that it has hills and mountains on it as opposed to being very flat. So this was probably a volcanic in origin. The volcano, haven't seen any signs of it, so it's probably extinct. But this island was probably formed through volcanism, and that means that finding something weathered from weathered ash is likely to happen. Likewise, the cave of rock crystals is something that is likely to have happened, because the rock crystals are quartz, usually. There are some other things, but quartz is a good general, hey, this is silicon dioxide, and it forms these big hexagons, and depend on what gets contaminated into it. It's the clear is quartz. Anyway, so you do get quartz made by volcanism. So that's a large, relatively clean group of rock that comes up. And inside of it is some trapped gas. And so you have this trapped gas, and then you have the rock slowly crystallizing. And so this is something that, it does happen that you would find a quartz cave. So that's actually something that, has potential. They shoot their pistols inside, which may trigger a cave in, but they said that they, got the sense of how big it was by the echoes. And because sound travels at a constant rate, you can tell how far something is, the far end of the cave is. And as I've talked before about human echolocation, that you can actually tell the size and shape of a room if you have practice. Now, a gunshot isn't the perfect thing for that because it makes so much noise that your ears tend to go fuzzy and you don't hear everything. But they go and they caught, Ernest killed an eel. Eel is a delicacy. Eel is a fish without fins. They don't typically have scales, so they're not kosher, but it's this long, thin fish. It swims in the water. And so it kind of looks like a snake, but it lives in the water and it's related to fish and it has gills. So they go, they find the monkeys. The monkeys tore up the place again. They're going to have to do something about that. Shoot a capybara. Okay, now capybara is the world's largest rodent. It's about the size of a medium-sized dog. It's kind of goat-shaped in terms of its proportions. So it has longer legs and a good-sized body, and the head is large and like a rabbit's, and once again with the teeth. And as I said, it's the biggest rodent, so it's bigger than beavers, and beavers are kind of huge-ish. And anyway, so they shoot a capybara and complain about the flavor of the meat, which as I said, things tend to taste like things that they eat. So if it eats trash, then it's going to taste like trash. And they kill muskrats, and they talk about the musk and the glands around the tail of the animal. Now, some of those are used for scents. There is the beaver has similar glands, and it produces a substance called castoreum, from castor meaning beaver in Latin, and that is used for artificial vanilla. So artificial vanilla flavor often comes from beavers, and they milk the beavers much in the way that it's described, where they put them in a place where they can't turn around, and they squeeze the glands and collect and then use it. Let's see. What else happened? Ostriches. Oh, ostriches are awesome animals. They run very, very fast. Ostriches are also kind of known for being stupid. So, ostriches have these big eyes and very tiny brains. These are animals whose eyes are bigger than their brains. People used to think that ostriches would stick their head in the sand to like hide from things, but no, it's just them going and eating. With the story goes that an ostrich would stick its head in the sand with the logic of, if it can't see you, then you can't see it, which is always very bad logic. But anyway, so the story goes that the ostriches stick their head in the sand to try and avoid being hidden. But the thing is that they stick their head in the sand to find things to eat. And yeah, they'll eat the melons, they'll eat the grasses, they'll eat small lizards, they'll eat just about anything. I've had ostrich meat. There are some places that sell it. Ostrich meat tastes very much like beef. So you know the story of, oh, it tastes like chicken, where everybody says everything that they can't describe what it tastes like. It tastes like chicken. Well, ostrich tastes like steak. Ostrich tastes more like steak than buffalo does. Can't explain it. Nice red meat, good flavor, tastes like steak. Very rare. Or, sorry, very lean. Very lean. And ostrich eggs. Yeah, the size of a baby's head. These things are huge. They're hard. You need like a hammer and chisel to get inside of them. One egg makes an omelet for like 20 people. Well, not quite 20 people, but I mean, it's a good dozen eggs worth of egg, and it's just one yolk and a whole bunch of white. And so it's an ostrich egg. And the thing is that ostriches, part of what gives ostriches the reputation for being stupid, besides the small brains, is that mama ostriches, when they are sitting on the nest, are not necessarily the most careful things. And so while the ostrich eggs are yay big with shells like a millimeter thick, the ostrich is a big bird, and it sadly occasionally steps on its own. Well, not even occasionally. It's a sadly common occurrence that an ostrich will step on its own nest and break its own eggs, and it's just a terrible thing. Ostriches are also used for leather. It's considered to be a very fine leather for making wallets and purses and whatever out of. So ostrich leather is another useful thing. The mud tortoise, the bears. So they fought bears, and bears are not found on islands. Bears are big, big animals that eat a lot of stuff, and it takes a whole lot of food to keep a bear fed. And you aren't going to keep two of them alive on a little island, because they range dozens of miles. And there was a bear that lived near my house here. So Pop and Lolly had a bear that was not quite in our backyard. It was maybe half a mile away, quarter mile away, just down the road. But haven't seen sign of it recently, but I mean, I saw it. It was just like walking out across the road, and they've had cubs. And so there are bears around here. What? Oh, yeah. We had bird feeders, and we think they were taken down by bears because The bird feeder I put up well enough that a raccoon could hang off of it. I couldn't quite, I don't think I would trust myself to hang off of it, but whatever it was fairly large that took it down. So we're thinking it was probably a bear that took it down, but we don't know. It could very well have been a bear, but if it was a bear, that means the bear was up on the deck, which is kind of frightening.
We've had raccoons.
We've had raccoons. We've had raccoons up on the. We've had groundhogs up on the deck,
Yep.
and you really don't expect groundhogs to climb stairs. But anyway, bears. They mentioned Captain Clarke. The bears were described by Captain Clarke in his expedition across America. This would be the Louisiana Purchase exploration done by Lewis and Clarke. So Captain Clarke was the Clarke of the Lewis and Clarke expedition, which went across North America and went looking to find the Pacific Ocean and went to find, okay, just how much land did Thomas Jefferson buy from Napoleon? So that was the Captain Clarke that was done there. As I said, bears they would not find on an island like this. They found pepper. So this is not like the red pepper, the green pepper. This is like the black table pepper. And that pepper grows in small little berries like this. And depending on when it's harvested and how it's treated, it's either white or black. Or, well, red pepper is something else entirely. But it's either white or black. And it's little berries about this big, hard, thin-skinned. And that's what the whole Columbus expedition was about. Columbus was tasked with going to India, going to China to get pepper. And he got lost. Well, he didn't get lost. He was just wrong about how big the earth was. Landed in the Caribbean in what was termed the West Indies. And he found the capsicum plant, known as the chili plant, known as the pepper plant, which has the peppers that you see like making Mexican food with. The large red things or the green ones or the yellow ones, which are also spicy. And so Columbus, knowing that he wasn't going to be bringing back actual pepper, and said, look at these are peppers, these are just as good. And everyone was like, okay, this is good food, I guess. But he did some good with that. But anyway, so they found the pepper, and then the boys go off on their own expedition, and Ernest wants to hang back because Ernest is kind of lazy, but since this expedition was a pure fun thing, it's like, okay, yeah, you can hang back. And Ernest is working on making decorative cups out of the ostrich shells, which is totally a thing. Ostrich shells are often carved and polished and painted, and because they're hard, because they're durable, because they take a polish well, they're, everyone decorates them and scrimshaws them and things like that. So that's totally a normal thing. And the dad discovers talc. Now, you may have heard of talcum powder, which is a soft white powder. Talc is the softest standard mineral. So there's a standard hardness of minerals. 1 is talc, 10 is diamond. So 10 scratches 9, 9 scratches 8, 8 scratches 7, 7 scratches 6, and so on all the way down. Talc is a 1. Your fingernail is 2.5. So if you go like this on talc, it just scrapes off. It just like crumbles in your hands. Diamond will scratch the next hardest thing, sapphire, which will scratch steel, which is 7.5. So diamond, sapphire, steel's about 7.5. Some, depending on how you make the steel, it can be a little bit harder. But anyway, steel is typically set at 7.5. Or no, glass is 7.5. Steel is 8.5. Quartz is 8. So diamond scratches sapphire, sapphire scratches quartz. Quartz is an 8, which is the same as the stuff that they found in the cave. So here they have the third hardest standard and the softest standard. Now, some of the things that he found in the talc, and these are perfectly normal things to find in the talc because talc is this, as I said, it's this soft, crumbly stone, but it tends to have inclusions. And inclusions are where you find one bit of rock inside of another bit of rock. And because it's just so soft, it gets these inclusions. And two of the things you typically find inside of a talc are you find asbestos and you find mica. Now, mica is really great. You find it in flat sheets. And that's what mica is known for. Mica is a type of rock that is known for forming these clear, flat sheets. So when you find mica, you find a whole bunch of it stacked up. And you can take a knife or just a stick or your fingernail and you just like stick it in between and you can peel it. And you peel these layers apart. And mica is known for just splitting. That it forms these large flat sheets. And if you split it thin enough, it works as a window. So here he found mica, and the mom is like, perfect, we have windows now, because she's like, darkness, because they're living in a cave. And, you know, this is the woman who wanted to say, I want to live in a tree. Because she wanted the open air, she wanted the sunshine, but she didn't want to be sitting on the beach under the burning sun. So, and the dad's like, we have a cave. So, discovered the mica, which is going to make windows for her, so she's going to be happy with that. As I said, the quartz nice and clear. The rock crystals are nice and clear, but it's these big, huge hexagons. And so while the quartz will give much more light than the mica windows, the problem is it's these big, huge hexagons. And because it's so hard, you aren't going to be scratching it. You aren't going to be cutting it. Nowadays, if you want to cut big things of quartz, you get a diamond-crusted saw and you have at it, and that cuts through it. But back then, yeah, you just pretty much had to be careful, and maybe you could cut it, but it was just a lot of work. And finally, they found asbestos. Now, asbestos is something that we realized was kind of bad back in the 1950s and 60s. People realized that, hey, asbestos leads to lung cancer. Because the little tiny flakes of asbestos tends to be found in fibers. So it used to be called rock wool because it's sort of a woolly substance. It looks kind of like wool. So it's like this white, hairy substance. It was found in rocks. And people found that they could spin it and weave it, and so that you could make fabric out of this rock. Now, wool burns, cotton burns, flax burns. Rock does not burn. So, because they could weave this rock into fabric, they could make fabric that would not burn. So asbestos started being used all over the place for insulation, for heat-proof insulation, for keeping things cool, for keeping things warm, and for places where there was going to be a lot of heat. So one of the things that they would do was they would wrap steel girders of buildings with asbestos, with the idea of if the building is on fire, the asbestos is going to keep the steel girders of the building cool long enough for either the building to be evacuated or for the fire to be put out. And sometimes this worked rather well. Back 21 years ago, 2001, at 9/11, the World Trade Center was attacked, and people flew planes into the two main towers of the World Trade Center, 1 and 2, and they caught on fire, and the fires were burning. And because there was so much jet fuel, there was so much concentrated heat, it managed to heat up the steel girders even through the asbestos insulation. And as the girders heated up, they softened. And as they softened, as the metal softened, it actually ended up weakening to the point where the building could no longer hold itself up, and the whole thing just collapsed. And a really terrible thing happened when the building collapsed was all of that asbestos that was there to keep the building up. When it failed to keep the building up, it released this huge cloud of dust that covered lower Manhattan, that covered, this spread for miles and miles and miles. And so you have all sorts of people who ended up getting lung cancer because they were around when the Twin Towers fell. So asbestos is one of those things that can be really great. It's great for places where you need the heat, but unfortunately, once it breaks up, once it starts falling apart and getting into the air and people start breathing it in, it can cause cancer and kill them, which is one of the reasons why it's not used anymore, or not used much anymore, except in very certain situations where it is used very carefully, and you have to be extremely, extremely careful in controlling it and getting rid of it. So when I bought the house, there had been some asbestos. It's like, look, I'm not buying the house until the asbestos is gone. And so the people who were selling the house had to go out and clean out the asbestos and get rid of it because, I didn't want to trust, your dad's life. I didn't want him to get lung cancer because of moving into the house with the asbestos. So it's like, okay, get the asbestos out. And so they got the asbestos out. And so we have a home without asbestos because the house was built in 1940. Late 30s, late 30s. So the house is old, and it was done when asbestos was a thing, where asbestos was used everywhere because, as I said, it doesn't burn. And you don't want a house to burn. So you want to make a house out of things that typically don't burn, which is brick, which is mortar, which is concrete. So, which is asbestos. But, the asbestos, as I said, can cause lung damage, can cause cancer. And so we got rid of the asbestos. And so there's places with less insulation, but, well, we don't have asbestos, which is a good thing. And the dad seemed interested in the talc, so we're going to see what he does with that. It has some uses. Oh, and porcelain. He found good soft clay that he thinks would be useful for porcelain. She found it. That's right. Ollie's right. The mother found the porcelain because the dad was like, oh, this is cool. Made balls of it and tested it out to see how well it fired, because you have to be careful with firing clay and it really changes. And he says that it melted, which I'm not sure about, but it's quite possible that he melted it somehow. But we'll see how the clay goes. We'll see how the talc goes. Those are some interesting things.